All right, aviation fans, buckle up, because today we are going deep into some seriously cool piloting maneuvers.
That's right. We're talking about the kind of stuff that really pushes a pilot's skill and the aircraft's performance limits.
And to guide us on this journey, we're cracking open the FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook.
Specifically, Chapter 10, Performance Maneuvers.
Yeah, we're talking steep turns, steep spirals, chandelles, even something called a lazy eight.
These maneuvers are all about honing those skills that can be crucial when things get a little tricky up there.
So let's jump right in, shall we? First up, we've got steep turns.
Steep turns.
Now I got to ask, what makes these so special? They're more than just tilting the plane a bit, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. We're talking bank angles of 45 to 60 degrees here.
Whoa.
So pilots really have to understand how lift gravity and centrifugal force all work together in these situations.
You're basically manipulating the lift vector, right? Like using part of it to turn the aircraft while still trying to hold your altitude. I was reading that during a steep turn, pilots can experience up to 2 Gs.
That's right.
So does that mean like everything suddenly feels twice as heavy?
Absolutely. That increased G-force affects everything.
Oh.
From how easily the pilot can move to how the instruments behave.
I bet maintaining orientation is super important then.
It is. It is.
Almost like trying to read a map while you're hanging upside down or something.
That's a good way to put it.
And on top of that, you've got the whole airspeed thing to worry about too, right?
Yeah, you don't want to go too fast during a steep turn.
Too fast, things could get a little messy.
Every aircraft has what's called a maneuvering speed, often denoted as VA.
Okay.
Exceeding that in a steep turn, well, you risk some serious stress on the aircraft's structure,
Oh, I see.
or even a stall.
Now, wait a minute. I thought stalls happened at low speeds, not high ones.
True in level flight, but when you're in a steep turn, that stall speed actually increases because of the higher load factor.
Okay, so it's not just the airspeed itself, it's how it interacts with the G-forces and all that.
Yeah. Exactly.
So if you're playing stalls at, say, 50 knots in level flight,
Uh-huh.
it might stall closer to 60 knots in a 45-degree bank,
Right.
and even closer to 70 knots at 60 degrees.
You need more airspeed to generate enough lift to counteract all that extra weight from those G-forces.
All right, so steep turns, definitely not as simple as they might sound.
No, they're not.
What are some of the techniques pilots use to stay in control during one of these maneuvers?
Precision and coordination, those are key. The pilot uses ailerons to counteract the aircraft's tendency to overbank,
Okay.
and the rudder to combat adverse yaw.
Inverse yaw.
Yeah, that's the nose wanting to swing in the opposite direction of the turn,
I see.
all while keeping an eye on altitude and airspeed.
Sounds like a lot to juggle.
It is.
A real mental workout on top of all the physical stuff from those G-forces.
It is.
I bet smooth control inputs are super important too.
Absolutely. Any jerky movements can make the aircraft unstable, especially at those high bank angles.
Right. Makes sense.
Smooth and deliberate movements, those are what you want.
I got it. So it's all about finesse.
Finesse, yes.
So you're using outside visual references too to maintain orientation.
Uh-huh.
So now let's say a pilot has to descend rapidly, but they need to stay over a very specific spot,
Okay.
maybe for an emergency landing or something like that.
Right.
That's where the steep spiral comes in.
Exactly.
Like the controlled version of that stomach-dropping feeling you get on a roller
I
coaster.
got it.
So picture this. A continuous gliding turn around a fixed point on the ground.
Yeah.
That's a steep spiral.
Uh-huh.
You're managing wind drift, adjusting the bank angle, and somehow keeping the airspeed steady while everything else is changing.
All at the same time.
That's
It's a lot.
that sounds like a real handful.
It is.
What are some of the challenges pilots face during this maneuver?
Well, one interesting thing is, even though it's a descent, you actually need to increase the throttle sometimes.
Oh, really? Why is that?
It prevents the engine from cooling down too much, and you avoid potential carburetor icing,
Oh,
which can be dangerous, especially at those lower altitudes.
So it's a balancing act. You got to descend quickly,
Yeah.
but also keep the engine happy.
That's right.
Makes sense, especially if it's an emergency.
Yeah.
But going back to that visual, you're circling downwards while staying over one specific point.
Right.
I think I'm getting dizzy just thinking about it.
Yeah, spatial awareness is super important here.
And just like with the steep turns, I'm guessing coordinating the ailerons and rudder is critical.
Absolutely. You need those for a smooth, controlled spiral.
All right, so we've talked about controlled descents.
Mm-hmm.
What about when you want to gain altitude rapidly while still maneuvering?
Okay.
Isn't that where the Chandelle comes in?
It is.
I've always loved that name, by the way.
It's a good one.
It sounds so elegant.
It does. It does.
So the Chandelle's about maximizing altitude gain for a given bank angle and power setting right. It's like the airplane is doing this graceful climbing ballet turn.
Like a rising candle flame?
Yeah. I read that Chandelle actually comes from a French aerobatic maneuver that looks like that.
It does. It does.
Very cool.
Very cool.
So it's got this mix of elegance and power, which sounds about right.
Yeah.
But from a pilot's perspective, what's the strategy behind a perfect Chandelle?
Well, it's a maneuver that's divided into two 90-degree phases.
Okay.
The first phase involves holding a constant bank angle while you smoothly increase the pitch.
Got it.
Then in the second phase, you hold the pitch steady while gradually decreasing that bank angle back to level flight.
So there's a real precision to it, like a carefully planned dance or something.
Yes, yes.
What are some of the things that pilots really have to pay attention to during this maneuver?
Timing is crucial.
Okay.
You want to roll out of that Chandelle at the 180-degree point with the wings level just as the airspeed gets close to stalling.
So if you roll out too early,
You won't complete the full turn.
and if you roll out too late,
You risk stalling.
so there's a real sweet spot you got to hit.
There is.
Sounds like a test of a pilot's judgment and finesse, not just technical skill.
It is, it is.
Are there any other little details that can make or break a Chandelle?
You always want to maintain smooth control inputs.
Right, we talked about that.
Throughout the entire maneuver,
Mm-hmm.
any sudden jerky movements on the controls disrupt the airflow over the wings,
I see.
and then the climb becomes less efficient.
So it's all about grace and smoothness.
Grace and smoothness.
Okay, we've got one more maneuver on our list today.
Right.
The Lazy 8.
The Lazy 8?
Now that name makes it sound super chill and relaxed,
But it does, doesn't it?
but I have a feeling it's anything but lazy.
You'd be right about that.
So what's the story behind this maneuver?
The Lazy 8 is a challenging maneuver that involves a series of interconnected climbing and descending 180-degree turns.
Okay.
And all of that forms a figure 8 pattern in the sky.
So you're literally drawing a figure 8 up there.
Yes, you are.
I can see why they call it the Lazy 8. But it sounds like it takes anything but laziness from the pilot.
It does. It does.
So what makes it so demanding?
Well, just imagine you're drawing that sideways figure 8 with the nose of the plane.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly adjusting the ailerons, the rudder, the elevator,
Oh, wow.
all to maintain that smooth flow and rhythm.
So the Lazy 8 is all about staying coordinated while you're managing these changes in airspeed and altitude.
That's exactly right.
It's like the ultimate test of how well you can control the plane.
It is.
I bet one tiny mistake can throw the whole thing off.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the most common errors is a lack of symmetry in that figure 8.
Okay.
Both halves need to mirror each other
Right.
to create that balanced and aesthetically pleasing maneuver.
Makes sense. So it takes a lot of planning then.
It does. Pilots need to visualize the maneuver before they even start.
Yeah.
They pick reference points on the horizon, mentally mapping out their path.
So it's like choreographing a dance, but with an airplane.
That's a great way to think about it.
And if the planning is off, you end up with some pretty messy footwork or wing work, I guess you could say.
You could.
What are some other challenges pilots might face during a Lazy 8?
Altitude deviations are pretty common.
So what, like if they gain or lose altitude at the wrong points in the maneuver,
Right, if they're not careful.
and that messes up the whole flow.
It does.
I can also imagine stalling being a concern with all the airspeed changes happening.
It is. Maintaining the correct airspeed throughout the Lazy 8 is crucial.
Right.
If the airspeed gets too low, especially at the top of one of those climbs, the aircraft could stall, and that's never good.
Yeah, definitely not a good situation.
Not at all.
So it's definitely not as laid back as that name suggests.
No, it's not.
But hey, I guess that's what makes it so rewarding to master right.
That's right.
It's a real testament to the pilot's skill and their connection with the aircraft.
It's an aerial ballet.
Very cool.
Very, very cool.
All right, so we're back, and we were just talking about how much precision goes into that Lazy 8 maneuver.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Aside from symmetry and altitude deviations, are there any other common pitfalls that pilots might run into while they're trying to pull this off?
Well, one thing that can trip people up is the timing during the rollout.
To roll out, okay.
Yeah, remember each 180-degree turn in that Lazy 8 has to end with a smooth transition back to level flight.
Right.
And if you rush that rollout,
What happens?
you might not get that perfectly level attitude
Oh, okay.
at the end of the turn.
So it's like missing a beat in a dance.
Yeah, it disrupts the flow of the whole thing.
And I imagine overshooting the rollout could cause problems too.
Oh, definitely.
What happens then?
You could end up gaining altitude when you're not supposed to.
I see.
which throws off the symmetry of the figure eight.
Makes it less efficient, I'm guessing?
Less efficient, yeah.
So it's all about that balance. You got to have momentum to carry you through the maneuver,
Yeah.
but you also got to have the control to make those little adjustments at the right time.
It's a real dance, that's for sure.
So let's switch gears for a sec and talk about the Chandelle.
Right?
We talked about how important timing is during the rollout for that one too.
Yes.
What are some of the other mistakes that tend to happen?
Well, one thing to watch out for is letting that bank angle creep up after you've established it.
So in that first 90-degree phase,
Right.
the pilot should be focusing on smoothly increasing the pitch
Yeah.
while holding that bank angle steady.
Exactly.
Okay, so you got to resist the temptation to tighten the turn midway through.
Resist that temptation.
Stick to the plan, trust the process.
Exactly. And another thing that's really important is that smoothness we keep talking about.
Right, any sudden or jerky movements on the controls?
Yeah, those can mess things up.
They disrupt the airflow.
Disrupt the airflow.
Make the climb less efficient.
Then they could even increase the risk of a stall.
So it's like the Chandelle requires this special finesse.
It does. It does.
A real delicate touch on the controls.
You got to coax that aircraft into the turn.
Okay, so let's spiral back, no pun intended, to the steep spiral.
The steep spiral.
We were talking about how pilots need to compensate for wind drift
Right.
to keep that constant radius around their reference point.
Mm-hmm.
How do they actually do that?
Hmm.
I can only imagine it involves a lot of active control input.
It does. It does. You're constantly adjusting that bank angle.
So when you're flying into the wind,
Okay.
you have to decrease the bank angle,
Right.
shallow out the turn a little bit.
So the wind doesn't push you in too close to that reference point.
Okay, so you're basically leaning into the wind.
Leaning into the wind.
Using the bank angle to keep that constant radius.
Exactly.
What about when you're flying with the wind?
Then you have to increase the bank angle
So steepen the turn.
to stop the wind from pushing you outward away from that reference point.
It's a constant game of adjustment then.
It is.
You're reading the wind and responding with these subtle changes in bank angle.
That's the key.
I bet failing to do that could really mess things up.
Oh, yeah, it's a common error.
What else?
The spiral gets all stretched out,
Okay.
becomes more oval-shaped instead of a nice clean circle around that reference point.
Not good if you're trying to land on a specific spot.
No, not at all.
So are there any other common problems pilots might face during a steep spiral?
Just like with the other maneuvers we've talked about, smooth and consistent pitch control is so important.
Okay.
If you don't manage that pitch attitude correctly, you might lose altitude too fast,
Oh, I see.
or you might find yourself too high when it's time to roll out.
Right.
And of course, coordinating rudder and aileron inputs is still super important here.
Even with all the bank angle adjustments.
Absolutely. Coordinated flight is essential for the whole maneuver.
So it really tests a pilot's multitasking skills.
It does.
They got to stay one step ahead of the aircraft.
Always.
Okay, let's wrap up our discussion today by talking about those high G steep turns. We talked about how those increased G forces can make it tough for the pilot to stay oriented.
Uh-huh.
Are there any specific things they can do to combat that disorienting feeling?
One of the best things to do is focus on outside visual references.
Oh, interesting.
Instead of just looking at the instruments, you
Wow.
want to scan the horizon.
So the horizon becomes your anchor.
Exactly.
It guides you through that G-force haze.
And just like with the other maneuvers, smooth and deliberate control inputs are crucial.
Right, we talked about that.
Any jerky movements on the controls actually make the disorientation worse.
Makes sense.
So it's almost like you need this Zen approach to flying.
Calm and smooth and collected.
Exactly.
No sudden moves, just a gentle dance with those controls.
That's the idea.
What about other common mistakes during steep turns?
Well, one that comes up a lot, and this applies to all the performance maneuvers really, is failing to properly clear the area before you start.
Oh, right, of course. Safety first.
Always.
Got to make sure there's no traffic or obstacles around.
Right, you don't want any surprises.
Good reminder. What other mistakes are specific to steep turns?
A lot of pilots struggle with keeping the bank angle consistent.
So not just hitting that target bank angle, but holding it steady throughout the turn.
Exactly. Any fluctuations in the bank angle and the aircraft won't trace a smooth arc.
So consistency is key.
Very key.
And of course, we can't forget about coordination.
Nope.
Using the rudder properly is crucial.
To counteract that adverse yaw.
And keep the turn nice and balanced.
Exactly.
All right, I feel like I could write the airplane flying handbook myself at this point.
I think you could.
But I'm sure there's still more to uncover about these maneuvers.
Oh, there's always more to learn when it comes to flying.
Welcome back, everybody. So We've spent a lot of time dissecting these performance maneuvers.
We have.
I'm starting to feel like I could give a lecture on them at this point.
Maybe you should.
But it all boils down to one question, I guess.
Okay.
What's the point of all this?
The point of all this?
Why do pilots train in these maneuvers?
Good question.
Is it just for bragging rights, or is there some real-world value to it?
Oh, there's definitely real-world value here.
Okay, good.
It's not just about looking cool up there.
Right.
The FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook really stresses that these maneuvers are about pushing your piloting skills to the edge.
So it's like a mental and physical workout.
It is.
It gets you ready for the unexpected.
Exactly. These maneuvers help you develop a better feel for the aircraft.
Okay.
You learn how to control it at different air speeds and attitudes.
So if you encounter some rough turbulence or wind shear, you're more prepared.
You are. You're more confident and you're more competent to handle those situations.
Like they say, practice makes perfect.
Or at least practice makes you a better pilot.
Exactly. Safer and more skilled.
And the Airplane Flying Handbook also recommends doing this kind of practice with a qualified flight instructor.
Yeah, good idea. I wouldn't want to try a steep spiral on my own.
Probably not the best idea.
So it's like having a personal coach.
It is.
They help you reach your full potential, but they also make sure you're doing it safely.
Absolutely.
So speaking of pushing potential,
Yes.
if you could try one of these maneuvers in a flight simulator,
Okay.
which one would you pick?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I know, right?
They all sound pretty amazing.
But if I had to choose,
yeah,
I think I'd go for the Chandelle.
the Chandelle. Okay.
There's something so elegant about it
It is elegant.
that climbing 180-degree turn, converting airspeed into altitude.
It's a beautiful maneuver.
It really showcases a pilot's skill.
And their understanding of energy management.
Plus, who doesn't love a good climb?
That's true. The view must be amazing from up there.
What about you? Which move would you choose?
For me, it'd have to be the Lazy 8.
Oh, the Lazy 8. Interesting. Why?
I just love the continuous flow and coordination of it. It's like a real test of your ability to work with the airplane.
It's a dance.
A dance,
You
exactly.
got to anticipate those shifts in energy and momentum.
That's what makes it so challenging and rewarding.
And I think that's what makes all of these performance maneuvers so special.
Yeah.
They challenge you.
They do.
They push you to your limits.
But they also give you this deeper understanding of flight.
It's not just about ticking boxes on a training checklist.
No, it's about becoming a better pilot.
Safer, more competent, more confident.
And I hope our little deep dive here has inspired you all to learn more about these maneuvers.
Absolutely. Whether you read up on them or try them in a simulator or even just chat about them with your pilot friends.
That's all good.
Because at the end of the day, performance maneuvers are about becoming the best pilot you can be.
Well said.
So keep your eyes on the skies and never stop exploring the world of flight.
That's what it's all about.